Everyone saw Seo Ju Hyun, who was writing something using his pen, when Kara asked Seo Ju Hyun to explain that he was writing tomb glyphs there. Kara was impressed by the knowledge that Seo Ju Hyun had. Seo Ju Hyun could read the tomb glyph thanks to the relic he had before, but now he doesn't have the relic, and after finishing writing the tomb glyph on it, Seo Ju Hyun brought his hand closer to the map. Everything Seo Ju Hyun did was a lie, and before coming here, Seo Ju Hyun had tracked down the position of the British Prime Minister and he already knew where the Prime Minister was. Kara looked surprised when Seo Ju Hyun found his location on the map. The Prime Minister was in the Sahara Desert now. Seo Ju Hyun also wrote down the exact location of the British Prime Minister. Kara, who found his location, immediately told his subordinates to contact the nearest post to the location of the Prime Minister. After they saw Kira's subordinates leaving, a gun was suddenly pointed right at Seo Ju Hyun's head. Kara ordered Seo Ju Hyun and Yu Jiha to stay here until Kira's subordinates find the Prime Minister. Kara also asks Seo Ju Hyun to tell him about the language of the relic, but Seo Ju Hyun rejected it. But because Kara gave Seo Ju Hyun a sharp look, he couldn't help but obey and would teach Kara step by step, and Kara agreed with that. Seo Ju Hyun was seen writing something down on the paper before someone's voice disturbed his concentration. The voice came from Kara's subordinate who said that they had found Prime Minister Albert. Kara also asked the condition of the Prime Minister, who seemed to be in good condition. Hearing that Kira's subordinate had found the Prime Minister, Seo Ju Hyun asked for permission to leave but Kara refused. Seo Ju Hyun said that Kara had gone too far by not letting him go now. Kara also said that she would not let Seo Ju Hyun go away until they could find out how to use the secret power of the relic. Hearing that, Seo Ju Hyun stopped his writing and said what if he didn't agree with Kara, who would detain him, and right after Seo Ju Hyun said that an explosion occurred right next to him. Kara asked what happened and he saw that the relic was burning. Kara also ordered his subordinates to put out the fire. But when his subordinate touched the map, he looked like he was possessed and instead tore the map relic. Not only that, the other subordinates were seen destroying the relic. Kara, who saw her subordinate possessed and going crazy, fired a bullet which hit her subordinate's leg. Kara was looking for Seo Ju Hyun. She was sure that Seo Ju Hyun was the cause, but one of her subordinates said that Seo Ju Hyun and Yu Jiha just disappeared. Kara became angry and upset now. Somewhere, Seo Ju Hyun and Yu Jiha were seen sitting at a fountain in the middle of the city. Seo Ju Hyun praised Yu Jiha because he could draw them quickly and make them successful, ran away from the place when chaos occurred. What actually happened was when everyone was panicking because they saw the explosion, Yu Jiha used his relic to draw this fountain, and their plan was successful. Before that, Seo Ju Hyun asked Yu Jiha to remember the fountain drawn by Yu Jiha using that ink relic. The relic belonged to CEO Kwon. Even though the relic only had tier B, the relic would be very helpful if a painter used it. Yu Jiha also asked Seo Ju Hyun's plans. What happened was Seo Ju Hyun borrowed a pen from Kara, then he exchanged it for a Shakespeare's pen relic, after which Seo Ju Hyun wrote his orders on the map relic he was using. Seo Ju Hyun remembered some of their names and hypnotized them. Seo Ju Hyun remembered the names of the receptionist and the two bodyguards Kara who picked him up in the hotel lobby before, and that was the reason why Seo Ju Hyun always asked their names. Then Seo Ju Hyun wrote them down using Shakespeare's pen and wrote it using tomb glyph language so they didn't know. Seo Ju Hyun then wrote down Jamie's name to throw a dynamite into room number 2002. Seo Ju-hyun also hypnotized the two bodyguards Kara named John and Jim to damage the map relic and made them think that if they didn't do it then Kara would be in danger. Yoo Ji-ha was impressed with the plan that Seo Ju-hyun thought of, and because Kara was no longer able to track them, they could go to Turkey now. Meanwhile, in a hotel room which was in a messy condition, Kara seemed to be talking to Richard. Kara asked Richard to repair his relic when Richard returned to America. Richard agreed because now he is currently repairing the relic from TBM recently. Kara said that the person who did it was the same person. Richard was surprised to hear Kira's statement. Kara was worried that Seo Ju-hyun would interfere with their plans. But Richard said that Kara didn't need to worry because Pandora will soon be launched, which will make it impossible for ordinary people to use relics or even own them. What will Seo Ju-hyun do now? What exactly is Pandora? A chef was seen slicing kebab meat. After finishing the kebab, the chef served it to Irene. Irene asked if there was something wrong, but the chef instead asked Irene back. A moment after that, Irene walked over, quickly leaving the chef in confusion. Irene smiled happily after she left the kebab shop and got into her car. Irene had now become accustomed to controlling her relic. But suddenly Irene became happy. Bad luck happened to the people around her. Irene became sad seeing the bad luck that happened again when she was happy. Seo Ju-hyun also calmed Irene and said that Irene was getting better at controlling the relic. Seo Ju-hyun also suggested Irene to use dominance, but this made Yoo Ji-ha disagree because Irene had just gotten used to using sociability. But Seo Ju-hyun suggested Irene use dominance to prevent her from being hurt by her own relic, and Irene agreed. After that they decided to go to the next place, still in Turkey to be precise, in an area called Cappadocia. The three of them had arrived in front of a tomb there, but Seo Ju-hyun still felt strange because if the relic had been in Irene's body then this tomb should have disappeared, but some of the other tombs had collapsed. There were also lots of soldiers on guard there. The soldiers were from America. They were working under Kira's orders, and on the other hand, there were also soldiers from Turkey on guard there. With so many soldiers on guard like that, it made it difficult for them to get into the tomb. But that doesn't mean they can't enter it. Yoo Ji-ha is confused about what plans Seo Ju-hyun will do now. The three of them are now in a toilet, and Seo Ju-hyun looks like he is trying to get something out of his bag. Seo Ju-hyun then explains that a tomb has a weak point, and Seo Ju-hyun also takes out a stone that had a red aura around it. Seo Ju-hyun thought about cutting a hole in the tomb so they could enter it. Yoo Ji-ha also doubted what Seo Ju-hyun would do. Seo Ju-hyun got the relic from the Medusa girl they met before, a relic shaped like a sweet potato. Then Seo Ju-hyun opened his skill window and will use one of his skills which will help him to make a hole in the tomb by destroying the relic to increase its effectiveness. Seo Ju-hyun also asked Yoo Ji-ha and Irene to cover his ears now. Seo Ju-hyun also channeled his power to destroy the relic, and the relic struggled violently when Seo Ju-hyun tried to destroy it. A dazzling light came from the relic held by Seo Ju-hyun, and immediately an explosion. What happened attracted the attention of the soldiers on guard there. Yoo Ji-ha and Irene were shocked to see the relic explode and make a hole in the toilet floor. Seo Ju-hyun entered the hole followed by Irene and Yoo Ji-ha behind him. The hole would lead directly into the tomb, but when they were in the hole, Yoo Ji-ha heard the voices of soldiers from above him. After walking for a while they met another wall blocking their way. Seo Ju-hyun said that he would blow up another relic now. A loud scream from the relic being blown up attracted the attention of the soldiers. While on Seo Ju-hyun's side, The wall that was blocking them previously had been destroyed, so they could now pass through. Uchiha still couldn't believe that the three of them managed to enter the tomb this way. Seoju Hyun then asked them to wait here while he looked for information about this tomb, but Uchiha and Irene, who were afraid, didn't want to be left behind by Seoju Hyun and chose to follow Seoju Hyun. Seoju Hyun brought his torch closer to the wall and read the tomb glyph there. Seoju Hyun found some interesting information. This tomb was called Hand of Midas and said that the relic on Irene's body was connected with this tomb, but Uchiha, who knew about the story, denied that what happened to Irene was the opposite of that story. But Seoju Hyun said that Midas' golden hand turned into really bad luck in the end. In Greek mythology, Dionysus the god of wine promised King Midas to grant his wish because King Midas had protected his teacher. Midas then asked Dionysus that whatever Midas touched would turn into gold. Dionysus granted Midas' wish, but Midas' happiness didn't last long because the food and drink he touched all turned to gold, making him hungry. Midas also asked Dionysus for help, and the god said that Midas had to cleanse himself in the Pactolus River, and with that, Midas could eliminate his previous request. Seoju Hyun then tried to think again about how to separate Irene from the relic, and Seoju Hyun will get the relic later. Seoju Hyun then looks at Irene if he has found the solution. But before they could act, the soldiers who followed them had arrived and fired bullets at them. Immediately, they ran away from the soldiers. Seoju Hyun didn't understand why they were able to fire their weapons in the tomb, but it seemed like it happened because the tomb head was damaged. Seoju Hyun looked at Irene, who was getting tired, and Seoju Hyun stopped and told Irene and Uchiha to leave him and continue running. Seoju Hyun took out his relic and turned to fight the soldiers who were following them. Seoju Hyun activated his relic, and immediately the relic he was holding lit up, and Seoju Hyun was ready to fight the soldiers himself. Will Seoju Hyun be able to fight those soldiers? Will Irene succeed in separating the relic from her body? Kara was seen to be surprised because she received a request for help from her tomb in Turkey. Her subordinates could not connect with the personnel there, and the contents of the message she received showed that her personnel in Turkey were having problems. Kara also asked her subordinates to report the incident, and her subordinate said that if 2 men and 1 unarmed woman entered the tomb, Kara was angry with her subordinates and she tried to rethink the possibility, and sure enough, Kara could immediately tell if this was the work of Seoju Hyun. Meanwhile, Seoju Hyun looked very ready to fight the soldiers with his relic, but Uchiha and Irene, who were hiding, looked worried about Seoju Hyun. The soldiers started shooting at Seoju Hyun, who was trying to escape. Seoju Hyun glanced back and smiled because he was able to attract the soldiers' attention and continued running until he arrived at a room filled with traps. The soldier managed to corner Seoju Hyun now and asked Seoju Hyun to give up. But one of the soldiers stepped on the part of the floor that had a trap there. When the trap was activated, a very dazzling light made the soldier turn into a golden statue, and when Seoju Hyun saw another soldier enter the room, he quickly attacked and defeated him. Several screams were heard and Seoju Hyun managed to subdue all the soldiers there. After finishing killing the soldiers, Seoju Hyun walked back to meet Irene and Uchiha, who were happy to see him back safely, then asked them to follow him towards the Pactolus River. But before they left, Uchiha asked about the soldiers who were following Seoju Hyun earlier, and was only answered modestly by Seoju Hyun. The 3 of them had arrived in a large room with crystals as lights and water. Underneath, Seoju Hyun was satisfied because this was going according to his plan. Seoju Hyun also told Irene to go and soak in the water, which made Irene confused. Seoju Hyun then explained that if King Midas could get rid of his power by soaking in the river, Seoju Hyun hoped that by doing the same thing, Irene would be able to remove the relic from his own body. Seoju Hyun checked the water and said that the water was safe. These words made Irene relieved to hear it. After that, Seoju Hyun and Yoo Ji-ha left Irene, who was going to soak there. But Seoju Hyun and Yoo Ji-ha didn't really leave. They both hid in a place where they could keep an eye on Irene. Seoju Hyun was just on guard if something happened to Irene, while Yoo Ji-ha was knowing that just sighed and averted his gaze, and when Irene washed his body he was a little doubtful if this would work, but the water reacted and a voice came from there, making him surprised. Seoju Hyun, who heard Irene screaming, quickly ran towards her. Several notification windows appeared in front of him, disturbing Seoju Hyun's view. Seoju Hyun told Irene to get out of there as soon as possible, but Irene couldn't move her body, and Irene saw that her hands were slowly turning into gold. Seoju Hyun, without hesitation, dived and swam towards Irene while thinking about what he should do now. Seoju Hyun knew that what was happening was not a trap, and the notification window also informed him that there was a relic sleeping here. Irene was sinking even more because her body slowly became gold, which made her heavier. But Seoju Hyun saved Irene and a voice was heard again. Seoju Hyun saw his hand turn gold because it touched Irene. Seoju Hyun couldn't swim now, and slowly their bodies sank, but Seoju Hyun still didn't want to give up while the relic continued to talk to him and said that if he would let Seoju Hyun live by not turning his body into gold, Seoju Hyun would be knows what he has to do, and he knows why this happened. The King Midas relic is divided into two, golden hand and failure hand. Irene now has the failure hand relic, and that's why the golden hand relic trying to take the failure hand relic by killing Irene. And what they need to do now is fight him using dominance. Seoju Hyun also told Irene to use his dominance too, and Seoju Hyun will help him with his. Irene did as he said. Seoju Hyun ordered. When the two of them combined their powers, the relic screamed in pain. The water there became uncontrollable, making Yoo Ji-ha, who was watching from a distance, a little worried about them. The relic was getting more and more in pain and asked them to stop, but Irene doesn't want to stop and further strengthens his dominance. Seoju Hyun, who saw Irene using all her strength, smiled proudly at Irene, and a dazzling light shone from the water there and made the water even more uncontrollable because Irene continued to exert her dominance. What happened? Can Irene control the relic? White light shines brightly from the water. Irene's body can also be seen slowly returning to normal. Not only that, the tattoo that indicates the parasitic relic on her body has disappeared. Seoju Hyun also explains that now Irene's power has been balanced because she succeeded in absorbing it. The power of the relic, the golden hand, and makes it easier for Irene to control her power. Hearing that, Irene is happy again and hugs Seoju Hyun with joy. Yoo Ji-ha, who saw them hugging, calmed down again because everything had been resolved, but in a hotel where Kara was now. Kara was seen, who was angry because he received a report from his subordinate if his subordinate did not receive a response from the soldiers guarding the tomb. Kara also said that if her assumption was correct, Seoju Hyun was the one who attacked her tomb in Turkey. Kara also said not to send reinforcements because she herself would face Seoju Hyun. His subordinates looked doubtful because the relic that Kara would use was very dangerous and had the possibility of destroying the tomb, but Kara didn't care about that. The main reason why Kara was given the title the King of War was because of the Sekhmet relic that he yes. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Sekhmet is the goddess of destruction who was sent to punish humanity. And because of this relic, Kara can destroy her target no matter how far the target is. That's why Kara collects map relics, because it will really help her. It can be seen that the tomb is starting to collapse, causing dust to scatter everywhere, but Seo Ju Hien is sitting casually as if there is no problem whatsoever. It turns out that Seo Ju Hien is using the relic of the Code of Hammurabi to prevent them from being crushed by the rubble tomb. But they can't stay here for long, because this tomb will soon collapse and bury them. Seo Ju Hien then said that he would destroy this tomb so he could get out using the same method he used before. Yu Jiha and Irene were confused about what Seo Ju Hien meant by trying something. From the previous tomb, Seo Ju Hien got a new skill, namely tomb restoration, but Seo Ju Hien can only try it now, and now Seo Ju Hien is seen thinking about how he will use this skill. Seo Ju Hien reopens his skill window and looks for information that can be useful. Seo Ju Hien looks happy after reading about the skills he has. Seo Ju Hien, who already knows what he will do next, puts his hands on the ground beneath him and uses his skills. And with these skills, the debris that fell before starting to rearrange to form a tunnel as their way out. Seo Ju Hien also told Yu Jiha that guarding him was something written in the contract they previously agreed to. But Yu Jiha did not fully believe Seo Ju Hien's words, but Seo Ju Hien said again that he would not make his slave die in front of him again. But Seo Ju Hien's words provoked confusion. Yu Jiha and Irene. Meanwhile, outside the tomb, there were two soldiers who were waiting for information about Seo Ju Hien and his team. Not only that, the soldiers in the office were also confused because they didn't get any trace of Seo Ju Hien and his team. Seo Ju Hien, even after they used the relic to trace Seo Ju Hien's aura. And other soldiers came with information that shocked everyone there, that there was a new road in the tomb, and said that the new road led to the nearest settlement. One of the soldiers immediately walked towards Kira's room to report to Kara, but he was detained by another soldier in front of the door because Kara was busy now. The soldier guarding the door also ordered the soldier in gray clothes to convey his message to him now. Meanwhile, Richard, who was on a video call, was made dizzy and annoyed by the baby in front of his eyes now, but the soldier who had just entered said that the baby was Kara, which succeeded in making Richard surprised. The soldier then explained if what Kara is experiencing now is because of the side effects of the Sekhmet relic, because Kara has used the relic. Richard, who heard the explanation from the soldier, also knows what happened because it is said that Sekhmet also took another form, as the goddess of love Hathor. Richard also asked about Seo Ju Hien and his team, but the soldier reported back that they had lost Seo Ju Hien and his team, and the baby, Kara, who heard that, screamed in frustration. Then Kara used his baby language and asked about Pandora's progress. Richard was surprised because Kira's subordinate was able to understand Kara, who used her baby language, and Richard also gave him good news. A meeting that was held, it was said that now Pandora is in control of all tombs and relics throughout the world. People are prohibited from looting tombs and using relics, and if someone breaks these rules, they will be labeled as terrorists and punished. Said Pandora will protect humanity from the relic, which will actually only lead this world to chaos with the relic, the Pandora box. Why does Pandora do this? And what will Seo Ju Hien do next? A plane belonging to Irene's family was seen carrying Seo Ju-hyun and his friends back to New York, even though Irene was supposed to take Seo Ju-hyun back to law, but Irene said that her parents invited them to come to her house. Irene had informed her parents that she had been free from bad luck, and with that, Irene's parents were very happy and wanted to invite Seo Ju-hyun to dinner. Of course, Seo Ju-hyun took this opportunity because he had caused some really big problems. He needed the Holton family on his side. At an international airport, Irene's plane had arrived and dropped off Seo Ju-hyun and his team, but Seo Ju-hyun felt a very strong relic aura at the airport and said that several troublesome people were standing guard there. A soldier from Pandora stopped everyone and asked them to hand over the relics they were carrying, but the people there certainly wouldn't want to just hand over their relics. One of the soldiers received a report that someone had run away with the relic. That person was caught by the soldiers on guard there. After that, the other soldiers said that they had to hand over the relic. One of the people who had the rank of colonel ordered his subordinates to punish people who were fighting them. The colonel also received another report saying that they had detected a relic related to wealth. Hearing the word wealth, the colonel smiled and told them to capture it. Meanwhile, Seo Ju-hyun and his friend were walking towards the crowd. Seo Ju-hyun also calmed Yoo Ji-ha, who was tense because they had been surrounded by enemies at this airport. Seo Ju-hyun glanced at Irene and asked him to try the new power that Irene got from the Midas relic. Seo Ju-hyun also briefly taught Irene, who had never used her powers, and said that Seo Ju-hyun would help her if Irene experiencing difficulties. And as soon as they came out of the tunnel, they were blocked by several soldiers in front of them. The colonel, who said his intention and purpose to stop them, made Seo Ju-hyun surprised because he heard the word Pandora from the colonel. Seo Ju-hyun then thought back to Pandora from his previous life, who said about protecting humanity from relics, but what happened was that they just wanted to collect all the relics from everyone and monopolize them. But in the memories of Seo Ju-hyun, Pandora would appear several years later. At least 3 years from now, Seo Ju-hyun finds out that the future has changed from what he remembers. The colonel still orders Seo Ju-hyun and his team to hand over all the relics, and Seo Ju-hyun refuses. Making the colonel surprised, Seo Ju-hyun instead threatened the colonel with his confidence. This suddenly made all the soldiers who surrounded him laugh at Seo Ju-hyun. It was seen that the colonel was getting angry with Seo Ju-hyun and was preparing to attack Seo Ju-hyun, but Seo Ju-hyun calmly invited them to come forward and attack him. Seo Ju-hyun gave a code to Irene to use his power, and immediately the colonel ordered his subordinates to attack Seo Ju-hyun. But with Irene's power, all the weapons the soldiers were using exploded, leaving the colonel confused. Meanwhile, Seo Ju-hyun praised Irene for successfully using her powers. Seo Ju-hyun held Irene's hand and asked her to strengthen her powers. Assisted by Seo Ju-hyun, if Irene's relic came loose control, the colony walked over to Seo Ju-hyun and ordered all his subordinates to attack using their respective relics. Irene strengthened her power, and in an instant, the entire airport was successfully controlled by Irene, with her power making all the relics within the radius 1 kilometer was affected. Seo Ju-hyun felt satisfied because his plan was successful, while Irene was now in an attacking state as her eyes changed color and her whole body emitted a golden light that destroyed the relics around her. All the soldiers panicked because the relics they were holding had been completely destroyed. Not only that, several soldiers were seen vomiting blood from their mouths, and one by one they started to fall. The colonel could only see all his subordinates running away from him. And with a grip on the colonel's neck by Seo Ju-hyun, He told the colonel to convey his message to Pandora. Just when the colonel managed to return safely from this place, there was a big explosion at the international airport. And with the news quickly spread reporting about the victims and damage received by the airport, meanwhile Seo Ju-hyun and his friend managed to escape using a car there. Seo Ju-hyun was satisfied to see that Pandora had ruined his own plans, and because it was Pandora's party who was at the airport at the moment, people would start blaming Pandora for this incident. Seo Ju-hyun thanked Pandora Irene because she had defeated all the soldiers there earlier easily. Irene, who received praise from Seo Ju-hyun, felt very happy because she could help Seo Ju-hyun. Seo Ju-hyun also asked about Irene. He asked whether Irene was in pain or something strange happened to her, but this was rejected by Irene and said that she was fine. But Seo Ju-hyun still feels strange because if Irene releases very strong power like before, Irene should accept the risk from using her very large power. Risk is one of the side effects that the relic user will receive for having borrowed a huge amount of power from the relic. They usually torture the user for using their power, and Irene used a large amount of her power to blow up the airport before. Because that's what the relic should be, Irene asks for payment. But Seo Ju-hyun can't know what risk Irene will accept for using so much of her power. When Seo Ju-hyun was thinking about that, Irene heard a cough. Irene said that she couldn't breathe. This suddenly made Seo Ju-hyun panic beyond belief. What happened to Irene? Then what will Seo Ju-hyun do to Irene now? Irene was still coughing because she couldn't breathe. Yoo Ji-ha and the driver in the front seat were also worried about Irene. Irene's body was shining, making Seo Ju-hyun beside her even more worried. It seemed like Irene was accept the risk now, but Seo Ju-hyun cannot know what risk Irene is suffering now. Seo Ju-hyun holds Irene's shoulder to help Irene suppress the risk, which is now getting worse. Suddenly, Irene became unconscious. This made Seo Ju-hyun very panicked now. Not only Seo Ju-hyun, Yoo Ji-ha also panicked seeing Irene, and suddenly Irene returning to consciousness made Seo Ju-hyun surprised. Irene gave Seo Ju-hyun a strange look. Irene moved her body closer to Seo Ju-hyun, making Seo Ju-hyun step back slightly scared. When Irene gets closer to Seo Ju-hyun doesn't know what he should do now. And Yoo Ji-ha was shocked, seeing Irene, who suddenly hugged Seo Ju-hyun tightly. Irene sniffed Seo Ju-hyun's body. Yoo Ji-ha also asked about Seo Ju-hyun's condition, and it seems like Seo Ju-hyun and Irene are fine, because Irene is asleep now. A notification window informs that after using the Midas relic, the user will feel a strong desire to get the thing he wants, and they will do anything to get it. Seo Ju-hyun, who read it, became aware of what risk was received by Irene, and another notification window appeared saying that Irene wanted Seo Ju-hyun's body odor this time. After that, Irene woke up. Her face turned red when she found out that she was now hugging Seo Ju-hyun, and screamed very loudly. Irene felt embarrassed and regretful now, but Seo Ju-hyun didn't mind it because it was Irene's relic that made her. Irene acts like that. Irene understands it. Seo Ju-hyun then asked the risk that Irene experienced about her body odor. Seeing Irene, who was confused, Seo Ju-hyun asked her to forget what she said before, and now they have arrived at Holton's mansion. Yoo Ji-ha felt uncomfortable and was afraid to go in because he had to meet George Holton and that would get him in big trouble. But Irene said that his brother was not at home right now, but Yoo Ji-ha still felt doubtful and afraid to go in. Seo Ju Hyun also asked Yoo Ji-ha not to hide because they would often visit Irene's family, and casually told Yoo Ji-ha to ask for forgiveness for what he had done. And finally, they got out of the car. Irene guided them into her house. But Yoo Ji-ha still looked scared and didn't pay attention to the conversation between Seo Ju Hyun and Irene. Irene thanked Seo Ju Hyun because Seo Ju Hyun had helped him. When they walked further, they saw a blue Ferrari in the parking lot. When they heard Irene say that, Yoo Ji-ha widened his eyes and became even more afraid, and before he could move, Yoo Ji-ha had a gun pointed at his head by Yoo Ji-ha. George Holton, George, who heard Yoo Ji-ha call him Big Bro, became angry, while Seo Ju Hyun just saw him as normal. Yoo Ji-ha was seen kneeling to apologize to George with a gun still pointed at him, but George, who was very angry, was now threatening to kill Yoo Ji-ha. Yoo Ji-ha glanced at Seo Ju Hyun to ask for help from him, but Seo Ju Hyun just smiled and didn't help Yoo Ji-ha, instead saying that Yoo Ji-ha had to pay for his own actions. And in the end, Seo Ju Hyun spoke to George and asked George to forgive him because Yoo Ji-ha had helped his younger brother. Seo Ju Hyun was still trying to help Yoo Ji-ha, which made him a little confused. Yoo Ji-ha was moved. George also thought about it again, because he also received news that they had helped Irene escape her curse. Seo Ju Hyun, who heard George agreed, became happy. But George was still stubborn because Seo Ju Hyun instead made his relic stay in his body, and instead pointed his gun at Seo Ju Hyun. Seo Ju Hyun also felt a little annoyed because George was not knowing anything about relics. Still stubborn, Seo Ju Hyun then said that they were helping Irene control her relic because it couldn't be removed from her body. George, who still didn't believe it, asked Seo Ju Hyun for proof. George became angry with Seo Ju Hyun again without listening to Seo Ju Hyun's explanation. Seo Ju Hyun then remembered back to Irene's words at that time saying that the Holton family had hatred towards the relic. Seo Ju Hyun looked annoyed now, and Irene started to defend Seo Ju Hyun. Irene said that there was nothing different about him, and asked George not to be rude to Seo Ju Hyun, who had saved him. George lowered his gun and said that the relic was dangerous because it might make Irene die. Seo Ju Hyun, who heard that, was shocked and asked George if there was something wrong, but George chose to remain silent. But Seo Ju Hyun was very sure that something had happened that caused George to hate the relic so much. Why does George hate relics so much? And what is George really trying to hide? Seo Ju Hyun, who asked again, made Irene a little worried when she saw George, who was annoyed, but George didn't want Seo Ju Hyun to interfere. Seo Ju Hyun was annoyed because George didn't wanting to admit it. Seo Ju Hyun walked away and was about to ask his parents. But George stopped him and made Seo Ju Hyun annoyed. Suddenly Seo Ju Hyun hit George in the face and ran away after him. Asked Irene to look after George. Quickly Seo Ju Hyun ran to Irene's house because he felt something was wrong now, making Irene confused. Panicked voices were heard in Irene's house. Meanwhile, George and Irene ran into the house. Seo Ju Hyun, who felt the atmosphere in the house, he smelled a smell he didn't like. Seo Ju Hyun knew where this smell came from and ran quickly towards the source. And sure enough, when Seo Ju Hyun opened the door to the room, he saw someone lying limp on the bed. Meanwhile, Irene, who had just arrived, screamed in surprise at the condition her mother. George, who was angry, grabbed the shoulder of Seo Ju Hyun, who was just looking straight ahead. Seo Ju-hyun asked the condition of Mr. Holton, and George answered that his father was in the next room in the same condition as his mother. When Seo Ju-hyun asked again, George couldn't answer because he had just arrived. George said that they were sick and that's why they stayed away from the relic. But now the situation is like this. Yoo Ji-ha asked George about the disease that attacked them, but George didn't know. Seo Ju-hyun then said that this was relic syndrome. Seo Ju-hyun's words made Yoo Ji-ha surprised because Seo Ju-hyun knew about this disease. And of course, Seo Ju-hyun knew because in his previous life he felt it himself. Seo Ju-hyun then explained that this disease could attack when exposed to relics, especially those who use their sociability. Seo Ju-hyun continued to explain some of the terrible symptoms of this disease, and to make it short, this disease will destroy the sufferer's body from the outside and inside. George, who asked about how to cure it, got the answer no from Seo Ju-hyun. In the past, this disease claimed a third of the population of Zagmuk, and other people living around it also suffered the same fate. And in the midst of the disease, they bought relic medicine. Seo Ju-hyun also worked to buy the medicine to relieve the pain. Seo Ju-hyun just looked with pity at Mother Irene. George also accepted that they had to die in this way. When George looked hopeless, Seo Ju-hyun gave him hope by said that he had relic medicine, and George, who hated relics, was of course angry with Seo Ju-hyun. But they had no other choice, because if George didn't want them to die like this, he had to be willing to use relic medicine. Irene also asked George to trust Seo Ju-hyun, and George gave up and accepted advice from Seo Ju-hyun. But Seo Ju-hyun said that if he couldn't do it now, this made George really want to hit Seo Ju-hyun but was held back by Yoo Ji-ha. Seo Ju-hyun had the relic medicine but couldn't use the medicine yet, and asked George to wait a few days until the relic medicine can be used. Seo Ju-hyun felt that something was wrong, because the symptoms they had now were the last stage of relic syndrome, but this disease should not get worse so quickly. Irene said that when they spoke to Seo Ju-hyun, previously they were fine. Seo Ju-hyun then thought back to the possibility that there was someone who deliberately accelerated the growth of the disease they had. Seo Ju-hyun thought back to what happened. For a long time they had had this disease, and that's why they stayed away from the relic, which later became their family tradition. And not long ago, when Seo Ju-hyun helped Irene get rid of the curse, Irene's parents invited him to this house, and now that they have become this angry in such a short period of time from the time they invited him, Seo Ju-hyun feels this is impossible. But Seo Ju-hyun, this could happen if someone knows about this and speeds up the process of this disease. Seo Ju-hyun also asked if their parents met someone before they ended up like this, but George said that his parents had a lot of guests. Seo Ju-hyun asked again about the possibility of a relic user from his guests. Hearing George answer, Seo Ju-hyun explained again that there was a possibility that there was a relic that was smuggled. Seo Ju-hyun also has a conclusion now. He says that if there is someone who caused all this to happen, it will shock everyone who hears it. Seo Ju-hyun explains that someone deliberately accelerated the stages of relic syndrome by using the relic. George, who heard this, looked very angry and asked if the person could be the culprit, but Seo Ju-hyun left it to George to find the person. Seo Ju-hyun had to go back to activate his relic medicine, but Irene, who saw Seo Ju-hyun leaving, wanted to come along. But Seo Ju-hyun stopped him and asked Irene to look after his parents. But Irene reasoned that there was nothing she could do here and would rather help Seo Ju-hyun get the relic medicine. But George stopped Irene, who wanted to leave because it was too dangerous. Irene was finally able to persuade Seo Ju-hyun to take her away. Seo Ju-hyun promised George that he would look after Irene and not let her get hurt. After they finally left Holden Mansion, Seo Ju Hyun seemed to be complaining because he hadn't had the chance to relax. Irene, who heard that, felt sorry for always getting Seo Ju Hyun in trouble. But Seo Ju Hyun didn't mind that and asked Irene not to worry. Yoo Ji-ha also asked what plans Seo Ju Hyun would carry out, and Seo Ju Hyun said that if they were going to find an elixir plant as a partner, the relic that would be the partner of the elixir plant was the relic of Zhu Fu. Will they succeed in finding the relic? And can Seo Ju Hyun cure the disease suffered by Irene's parents?